All right, we are live. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. If you're joining us now, welcome. Welcome to Early Career Climate Leaders. This is our second event in the Early Career Conservationist series with the Laguna Foundation and Ag and Open Space. We would love to hear where you're tuning in from today. So as you join, feel free to go ahead and pull up the chat box, which you can find by hovering your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom screen, and the option to chat should pop up. We would love to know who's joining us out there in the audience. Hi, thank you. Thanks for saying hello. I'll go ahead and get started introducing a little bit about the series, the Laguna Foundation, Ag and Open Space, and who we are, and we will continue to have folks join us. If you haven't already, as I mentioned, if you're just joining us, feel free to say hi in the chat box and let us know where you're tuning in from today. My name is Allison Titus, and I am the Community Education Manager here at the Laguna Foundation, and I will be moderating this panel discussion today. I am tuning in from Southern Pomo and Wapo land in Santa Rosa. I will introduce the Laguna Foundation and Ag and Open Space and give you some housekeeping notes before I introduce our wonderful panelists here with us this afternoon. So welcome to our second event in the Early Career Conservationists of Sonoma County series with the Laguna Foundation and Ag and Open Space. This series is an extension of a popular panel discussion we hosted this past fall. And there is one more event coming up in this series. We will end this series by flipping the script and hearing from mentors, people who empower and support early career leaders. They will give insight and tips to aspiring environmental professionals, like what they look for when they're hiring new employees. So I encourage you to register for the last event and share that with any people you know who may be interested. And the event we hosted last week, Women in Conservation, is available on our YouTube channel. All of these events will be recorded, including this one, and sent to you in a follow-up email. And please feel free to ask questions as we go along using the chat box, and we will have a brief Q&A section at the end of the panel. So the Laguna Foundation is a nonprofit organization based in Santa Rosa that works to restore, conserve, and inspire public appreciation for the Laguna de Santa Rosa wetlands. So the Laguna is a wetland and a 22-mile-long waterway, as well as an entire watershed that encompasses Santa Rosa, Cotati, Rohnert Park, and parts of Sebastopol and Windsor. And the Laguna de Santa Rosa wetlands have been heavily impacted by development and face important issues that drive our restoration, conservation, and education work today. In more modern history, it has gone from being described as devoid of aquatic life in biological reports in the 1970s to being designated as a wetland of international importance 10 years ago this year, so in 2011, because of the incredible biodiversity still found here. Even with that designation, there is still a lot of work to be done. The Laguna today still has poor water quality, high amounts of introduced species, and many people do not know why the Laguna is so important or even where it is, even though it sustains over 250,000 people in Sonoma County, in addition to the plants and animals. And I should mention, as we get into this panel discussion, that the Laguna is affected, as is everything, by climate change. Our endangered species found in vernal pool ecosystems are struggling to adapt to new climatic conditions. Extreme weather events cause historic levels of flooding within the Laguna, which are exacerbated by climate change. Climate change alters bird migration patterns and available resources, and the list goes on and on. So this is an important topic to us here. We do this important work of conserving this watershed and working to restore wetland habitat and educate future generations with the support and partnership of organizations like Ag and Open Space, so that the Laguna is a place for all to enjoy and protect for years to come. We host outings on, learn about, and explore the open space that Ag and Open Space has preserved and protected with conservation easements. Over 122,000 acres in Sonoma County have been protected this way to date. And protecting this land is a critical tool for addressing the climate crisis. This open space helps us be more resilient to those extreme weather events like flooding, and the many grasslands, forests, and wetland ecosystems within those 122,000 acres store and sequester vast amounts of carbon. So thank you for your public support of Ag and Open Space and conservation in Sonoma County, and for making educational opportunities like this possible. Okay, that's a little bit more about the organizations hosting this event. And I want to talk a little bit more now and give a special thank you to our panelists for being here today and taking time out of their busy schedules to have this candid discussion on Zoom. I also want to acknowledge and thank your organizations, our partners here in Sonoma County, the Climate Center, Pepperwood Preserve, Daily Acts, Sonoma Water, and Sunrise Sonoma County. So again, I mentioned this in the last panel and I'll say it again next week, but our 4 panelists here with us today are just 4 of the many incredible people working in Sonoma County that could be on this panel. So shout out to all of you out there who are also doing this. Panelists here with us today are working to address the climate crisis in their careers and in personal projects. Their climate action strategies range from prescribed burning, to tracking climate policy, to educating students, to making films, to doing community organizing, just to name a few. And I want to mention that, climate action includes and goes beyond conservation and connects so many different fields, from public health to urban planning to social justice, and it just affects so many aspects of our lives. And these panelists we have with us here today demonstrate some of the wide range of possibilities for working on climate change solutions. And I hope this gives you a glimpse into the different kinds of creative problem solving that these folks are doing here in Sonoma County, and that it might inspire you to take action in some small way, or perhaps even pursue it in your own career. So we will talk about what inspires these panelists, their different career paths and projects, and what they want people to know about taking action for the climate. I'm really fortunate to have worked alongside all of you and consider you as friends and peers and colleagues. Thank you for inspiring me to take action on climate in my own life through organizing with Sunrise and volunteering with the Good Fire Alliance, organizations that you all are involved with. And I'm really excited for this conversation with all of you. We will start with some brief introductions, beginning with Connor. I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Allison. So, hey everybody, I'm Connor DeVane. I use he, him pronouns, and I currently live on the traditional lands of the Southern Pomo, specifically the place that is now called Forestville. I'm a programs coordinator for Daily Acts organization, which is a small but mighty environmental education nonprofit that inspires transformative actions to create more connected, equitable, and climate resilient communities. We do a lot of different things, but in the programs department where I work, we're mostly focused on spreading models and solutions, whether we're hosting hands-on workshops to transform a thirsty monocrop lawn into a water-wise habitat and oftentimes food-producing garden, installing rainwater harvesting and gray water systems, or hosting panels much like this one with local experts to teach the community about things like home scale carbon sequestration, and so much more. I definitely encourage y'all to check out all the amazing things that the rest of our team works on. So that's my day job. Beyond that, I organize with the Sonoma County hub of the Sunrise Movement, which you're going to hear about from Christine and Nina as well. But at a glance, we're a nationwide movement of young people fighting to stop the climate crisis and create millions of good jobs in the process. So with Sunrise, I'm currently the politics team lead. And I say currently because we rotate leadership positions. Sunrise is a very horizontally organized and leader-full movement, which is something I really love about it. At the politics team, we're mostly focusing on things like local elections, endorsing climate champions, influencing local policies, strategic frameworks, general plans, climate emergency action plans, all of that in service of building what would essentially be a Green New Deal for Sonoma County and building community in the process. Last thing I want to mention is a personal project that I've been working on for the last 5 years or so. So I made a feature-length, independent, and not-for-profit documentary film called Hike the Divide, a conversation about climate action on the Continental Divide Trail. The film follows my 2016 hike of about 3,000 miles from Canada to Mexico through the Rocky Mountains. But really, it's about the people I met along the way who are working on community-centered, grassroots, local responses to the climate crisis across a whole spectrum of approach, from municipalizing public utilities to civil disobedience, and a lot more. So that premiered in the 2019 Portland Eco Film Fest. It screened in a couple festivals before the pandemic hit, and it's now available for free streaming on my website. And I'll drop the chat for anyone who's interested. So yeah, lots of eggs in a bunch of different baskets. That's probably a good place to leave off for now. So I'll pass it back to you, Allison.
Yeah, thanks. I know there's so many ways you can get involved, and yeah, so many of you are doing many things to address this issue from many angles. I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Nina to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janina Turner. I also go by Nina. I use she, her pronouns. I currently live on Coast Miwok land in Rohnert Park, California. I'm a graduate of Sonoma State in the Energy Management Department, and I've been in Sonoma County for about 10 years now. I currently am the Communications and Energy Program Coordinator with the Climate Center. The Climate Center is a climate-based policy nonprofit in Sonoma County. We do a lot of statewide work, working to enact policies that will lead California as a whole to net negative emissions by 2030 and usher in an era of California that will be safe from major climate catastrophe. Some of the work that I've done has been helping California adopt community choice agencies throughout the state. Community choice agencies are kind of like small scale utilities that work with the larger utilities like PG&E, but ultimately help provide more local jobs, more local renewable energy, kind of helping shift away that fossil fuel infrastructure that we've all been using for far too long. And I'll just quickly talk about the Sunrise Movement. I know it's been talked about already and will probably be talked about again, but as a whole, we're a youth-led movement on the large scale that aims to enact a Green New Deal on the federal level, which therefore will provide people with good paying job with benefits, securing a livable future, all that good stuff. I am the hub coordinator for the local chapter here. I'm also a actions lead for the Western region. So one thing about Sunrise is we do a lot of direct actions, whether that be banner drops, whether that be sit-ins in offices of politicians. I kind of help get all that stuff situated and make those a reality. So brief intro for me, and I'll pass it back to Allison.
So yeah, those are like basically two more than full-time jobs. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I will hand it over to Devin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Devin Friedfel. I am currently the Natural Resource Specialist at Pepperwood Preserve. I'm also a Sonoma County native. I grew up in Forestville, California, went to El Molino High School, went to Srjc, went through the Natural Resource Management program there, did some stewardship work at Schoen Farm, and that was really my first real introduction into conservation and stewardship work. Leading volunteer work days. From there, I transferred to UC Santa Cruz, where I got my bachelor's degree, worked a lot with the UC reserve system down there, and really just got tied into as much field work as I possibly could. Ever since being a kid, really, I just had the dream of having a job that I could work outside. As you work outside and get more connected with the natural environment, you start to realize all of the issues that are sort of surrounding around it. So that kind of just led me down the rabbit hole of the need for conservation and the need for ecological restoration. So that's kind of where I started dedicating a lot of my time and energy was to restoration work. I was in the restoration world, you bounce around and do a lot of seasonal jobs. So I took a ton of seasonal jobs up and down the Central Coast. But it was really cool. I got to work in Big Sur for a lot of areas. I got to work in the Sacramento Deltas, Santa Cruz Mountains, and just learned a bunch of cool techniques and just everything from mine reclamation jobs to gas pipeline installations and how to do vegetation management and restoration post large construction jobs. Then I was fortunate enough to hear about a position up in Sonoma County at Pepperwood Preserve, which I had visited when I was a student at Srjc. So dreams do come true. You can get to work at where you fantasize about when you're growing up. So it was really cool. I've been here for about 5 years now, and my role really involves everything from involving ecological restoration, but also maintaining our trail system, making sure they're not eroding, and then all our infrastructure stuff too, but I also do our community, large portion of our community engagement. So getting people out on the land, teaching them these stewardship techniques, and hopefully kind of spreading the bug of wanting to care for our natural environments. And then I've gotten recently pretty active in the Good Fire Alliance and helping other land stewards put good fire back on the ground and do fuels management. As Sonoma County has seen, wildfires are a severe issue, portion because of climate change and these more extreme weather events we're seeing, but also because this over 100 years of fire suppression that our Western culture has kind of put on this land, which has not been beneficial for it. So just trying to reintroduce fire back onto our landscape. Back to you.
Great. Thanks, Devin. Yeah, I know you do so many different like biological monitoring and natural resources monitoring techniques up at Pepperwood, and really are on the cutting edge of some of this climate research that is done out on the land. So thank you for being here to share a little bit about that. I will pass it lastly to Christine.
Thank you. Hey everybody, my name is Christine. I take she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Southwest Santa Rosa, which is Southern Pomo lands. And I also grew up locally. So I grew up in Sebastopol, graduated from Anley High School. Saw someone who was calling in from Anley High School in the chat. Represent, appreciate that. After graduating from Anley High School, I attended UC Berkeley, where I studied conservation resource studies with a focus on environmental education. With that background in environmental education, I was able to work a couple different places. First in the Santa Cruz Mountains, probably the best job I will ever have as an environmental educator. And then from there, I decided to become a classroom science teacher. So taught for a while in San Francisco, taught for a while in Oakland, and then moved up to Sonoma County again in 2017, right before the Tubbs wildfire. And that has really propelled me in the work I have been doing with climate action and climate justice as well. I currently work for Sonoma Water as a water and energy educator, which in many ways is a dream job for me because I day in and day out get to teach high school students all about climate science. So, just earlier today, I was teaching a class to a whole bunch of students actually from Sebastopol about wildfire science and also climate science as well. And these days, teaching on Zoom does look like a whole bunch of dark boxes that I'm teaching to, but I know students are still engaged based on kind of the profound things that they write in the chats. And like Connor, like Nina, I also organize with Sunrise Sonoma County. With Sunrise Sonoma County, what that looks like is, I would say, most evenings of the week and also weekends as well. We are on calls together, we are organizing, we're building both people power and political power here in Sonoma County in order to act Green New Deal policies. And that is incredibly inspiring and powerful and fun work. And we'll be talking more about it soon, I'm sure. So I'll pass back to Allison.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. It's amazing just how much people power is here on this panel today. So it's just a real treat to get to hear from all of you. We talked a little bit, I think we hit on this a little bit with our introductions, but I'd love to take just a quick bit to hear about a project or program that you are currently working on that directly contributes to climate change solutions, maybe one that you're really excited about or some portion of it that is exciting to you. Just a little bit of what this really looks like in your day-to-day life for the audience would be great. And I will go ahead and start with Nina for that question.
Whoa, okay. So again, I work at the Climate Center, climate policy-based nonprofit. One of our big things right now, which is something that I think a lot of climate nonprofits and organizers can relate to, is just getting stuff done before 2030. If 2030 seems like an arbitrary year, that's pretty much based off the IPCC reports that came out. And if that sounds like a bunch of letters that you don't know what that means, essentially a bunch of scientists globally came up with essentially a deadline for when we need to have climate action pretty much passed and done so we can have a livable future. So we have a whole platform called our Climate Safe California campaign. And overall, it aims to have California as a state enact bold policies required by science to dramatically reduce emissions, start carbon drawdown from the atmosphere, and secure resilient communities, all by 2030. But the goal is to get all those policies passed by 2025. So fairly soon, but we need it all to happen soon. It's a big task. And this is kind of like related to the Green New Deal. It's not just one policy, it's like a sweeping, platform of legislation. So right now it's about getting cities, getting politicians, getting individuals learning about that platform, endorsing that platform, and ultimately getting those policies passed. An example of a bill that's coming up is SB 99, which is a community resilience bill, kind of making sure that everyone has access to backup power and community microgrids in the near future, just because, as we all know, here in Sonoma County, power gets shut off just about every fall. And, that's not sustainable for a lot of people. A lot of people rely on that power for, obviously food, but also for like medical reasons and things like that. So that's a really big project that we've got going on. And it's super interesting to learn about, and there's always new things coming into it. So that's one thing that the Climate Center is doing. I think Sunrise is like an ongoing big project of kind of a similar thing of just making sure that our local politicians and local policies are being enacted that address climate and address resiliency and getting those passed as soon as possible. This is where my work really intersects, is like getting really good policy and having really good people in office that really care about climate change and making sure we secure that livable future. So a little bit about that, and I'll pass it back to you, Allison.
Yeah, the policy piece is so important. And I know it's probably of interest to a lot of the young folks out there watching this panel. And it's just really critical, hard work. And yeah, that 2030 deadline. I mean, the deadline was 2020 for a lot of things. And now it's 2030 for real. It's the decade to take action. I'll include some resources about that in the follow-up email. Also, just wanted to say I have like a soft spot for the policy work in my heart, because in my family, we came from, both my sister and I grew up in Mount Shasta. We both work in the environmental field, but she she graduated from the same program as you at Sonoma State, Nina, and she's going to get her master's in energy policy and management at Davis. So super important work. And yeah, I'm really glad that you can talk a little bit more about what's going on the ground with that. I will pass it over to Christine.
Yeah, so I would say what I'm most excited about in my work that I do that directly relates to climate change and climate action is developing curriculum and also teaching those lessons that both teach the climate science, but also provide avenues for climate action for students to take as well. You know, the science is so important. Like, students are not, young people, anyone in general is not going to take action unless they deeply understand the science of what is happening to our planet and its people. But just the science is not enough. And I've made that mistake before, actually, of just teaching the science and not providing avenues for action. Actually, I was teaching at Roseland Collegiate Prep when the Tubbs fire burnt down that school in 2017. And so with my high school students, we like moved to a couple different campuses during that time, ended up settling at like a warehouse type campus over off of Sebastopol Road. And I was determined at that time to teach about climate science, to like help students understand why this major disaster, why their city had been destroyed, why they had lost their campus, why they had lost their homes. And I remember teaching the science, like feeling really good about like, okay, students, like, we've read the IPCC report, we understand the science behind things. But then I also remember students at the end of the day just being so dejected. And I remember one student in particular, like super melodramatic, but she kept being like, we're all gonna die, we're all gonna, and just like saying that over and over. And that really helps me realize that understanding the science is incredibly important, but also providing tools and avenues to kind of help with the climate anxiety that many of us as young people feel is incredibly crucial as well. So I'm just super excited that that's something that I can do with my job, is provide opportunities for young people to get involved. Getting involved is something that's helps me incredibly with climate anxiety. You know, I was so concerned and so worried and staying up so many nights thinking about that year 2030, thinking about how we had 10 years left to make major changes. But getting involved with the Sunrise Movement has really provided that avenue and that community to make effective change. So that is just like one project that I'm super thrilled about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a hard topic to talk about without also talking about action or things you can do. It's always the question that people ask, well, what can we do? What can we do? So we will get to that at the end of this panel as well. Know that we won't leave you hanging with that either. And, you know, yeah, it's melodramatic, but I mean, it hits you, those kinds of statements, and it's powerful. And I know this is just such an important topic to youth, especially. So thank you for that. I will pass it over to Devin.
All right, there's so many fun projects. The other 2030 plug I will say is 30% of lands conserved by 2030 also, because if we don't have lands conserved, we have no place for the carbon to go. We need those carbon sinks. On that note, I think I'll talk a little bit about some of the forest stewardship work we've been doing at Pepperwood. So I think there is this consensus in the last maybe 30 years where nature's good. Let's leave nature alone. Humans don't belong in nature. Let's let things kind of just go. Great, it's sequestering carbon. But as we've seen, these extreme wildfire events have released all of that carbon. So even though these trees are 50 years old and they've been sequestering carbon for a long time, as we're seeing more in extreme weather events promoted by wildfire, if we do not steward our landscapes, they will not be as resilient to these more extreme wild events. And we get this kind of like cyclical cycle of things perpetually getting worse. So I think it's really important to understand that we are a component of this environment, and we need to work to push it back in the direction away from the direction we've kind of pushed it. So some of the forestry work we've been doing, we've been working a lot in our oak woodlands. Pepperwood has, I think, over 1,300 acres of oak woodlands, and that's an extremely high biodiverse ecosystem. And that's one of our main goals, is to promote biodiversity, because the more diversity you have, the more resilient that ecosystem can be. So when you get this like extreme fire event or flooding or a disease coming through, the more diversity we have in our ecosystems and just in general, the more resilient we can be to these more extreme events kind of happening. So been working a lot in our forests to kind of remove a lot of the fuels in there. So when a wildfire does come through, it won't kind of burn and kill the trees. And we're really trying to push, reduce the amount of trees that we have in our forests, so we can increase the size and health of the trees that are existing. Because the larger trees are, the quicker they can sequester carbon, and the stronger they'll be from the next wildfire event. So making sure that we're getting hands on the ground and kind of like clearing through that. And then the next big component with that is taking people out. We've done a lot of piles, so we're doing a lot of pile burning. And Allison actually came out and helped us out this last Saturday. So just really trying to bring people out and say, hey, we are maybe cutting down a few of these thin Doug fir trees that have been encroaching into our oak woodlands, or maybe cutting out some brush, but come look at our forests. We're really trying to promote healthy forests. And that doesn't mean we can't be hands-on. That doesn't mean we can't do conservation grazing through our understory of our forests. We also extensively monitor our forest health. So we recently, with our preserve ecologist, has set up these research plots to really trying to comprehensively understand the health of the forest, not only from the trees perspective, but also the herbaceous species. So all of the plant biodiversity in there. We've also set up a bunch of cover boards to kind of look at the herps. So the lizards and salamanders that exist in this. We've set up wildlife cameras to see if our wildlife is going to change after we kind of clear out the forest versus before. Lichen studies. And then we're also a biological field station. So we're encouraging other researchers to come and study whatever they want to study about these forests as we kind of do our stewardship through them. And ideally, we can get our preserve back to a place where we can reintroduce fire on about an 8 to 15 year cycle. We work closely with our Native American Council, and they have expressed interest in bringing back cultural burning, because the indigenous people on this land used to use fire and steward this land with fire. So we're hopefully trying to get back to the point so we can support them in doing their cultural burns. So it's really this kind of like longer term vision of getting the forest back to a healthy place. We're really in this like fuels reduction period, but hopefully we can get it into kind of a cycle that we can then just kind of like healthily manage it, and we won't have to put a ton of resources. And then use Pepperwood as a place to hopefully teach others and just give examples. And maybe if they don't feel comfortable doing something on their property, they can come up, work with me, get comfortable doing it, and then go back to their community, go back to their land, and then kind of spread the word. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that 30 by 30, 30% of land conserved, the other 2030 goal. I appreciate that. And it's really impressive how Pepperwood manages its land for climate resilience, for biodiversity, really intentional with all these forest health practices. And it is really neat that you invite other people to be a part of it, and that you encourage folks to take these techniques back out onto their own property if they have property, or to spread the word and be a part of this stewardship in their own lives. I know I enjoyed being a part of it, so it's a really neat opportunity that you have there. Last is Connor. What's something you are excited about, or a project you're working on?
Yeah, so I mean, in a sense, kind of everything that we do at Daily Acts has to do with climate, and not in just the way that everything we do is related to climate, you know, the air we breathe, everything. But one area that we're kind of recently started wading into that I'm really excited about, you know, as Devin was talking about carbon sinks and sequestration, you know, regenerative agriculture has been a pretty hot topic for a lot of people lately, sometimes called carbon farming. And so what we're working on at Daily Acts is what we call carbon gardening. So basically taking these like larger scale and sometimes even systemic solutions of managing land in a way that maximizes the amount of maximizes like a soil's ability to pull like the bad carbon, which is atmospheric carbon, store it in the soil to make it good carbon. Translating that to the home scale, you know, like I also love policy, as you know, like Nina and Allison were saying, but I'm a big proponent of the both and. Like we need, you know, the sweeping systemic changes, but we also need to be pushing up from the bottom at the personal and community scales. So what that has looked like so far, a couple months ago, hosted a series of events, starting with a screening of the documentary film Kiss the Ground, which is a really good jumping off point for this topic. It's you know, it's kind of skimming the surface. It's lacking in a lot of a couple crucial perspectives, including traditional indigenous management of lands, but basically demonstrating the capacity and potential of the soils of lands that are being managed a certain way right now to maximize the amount of carbon they're pulling from the air. So we hosted the documentary and then had two different panels with local experts, kind of giving folks an understanding of what carbon sequestration is, what carbon farming is, how that can be done at like a commercial landscaping scale, how that can be done at a community scale with things like community gardens and food forests, all the way down to what you can do in your own backyard, which I find resonates with a lot of people who are otherwise not particularly drawn to engaging with climate solutions because maybe they seem daunting or can seem like too wonky with policy. You know, for a lot of people, and oftentimes myself, it's just like, what can I do tangibly right now? So teaching people what practices they can be implementing, whether they're growing, you know, a native habitat garden or, you know, trying to produce as much of their own food as possible. Things like implementing compost, mulching, planting natives, not disturbing the soil, so on and so forth. And of course, all of these practices are part of virtuous cycles, right? You're not only sequestering carbon, but you're increasing the amount of water infiltration and retention on your land. You're reducing runoff, you're providing habitat and food for local fauna. So I'm really excited to see where we go next with this carbon gardening concept, and really excited at the idea of kind of normalizing the, oh, my backyard is, yes, like, sure, an oasis for me and my family, but it's also where I'm tangibly taking action on climate in a way that I can see the visible impacts of. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like the both and approach as well. I think that could be like a theme for this panel, addressing so many different issues at once with so much of the work that we're doing, you know, pushing for the systemic change at one level, and also for individual change and for individual engagement as well. It's inspiring for me to hear about all of the things you all are doing. And I would love to hear now a little more. I think this is always my number one question for people who work on climate related issues. Like, what inspires and motivates you to continue your important work on climate on a day-to-day basis? You know, it can be really overwhelming, you know, as Christine mentioned, it can just be hard to grapple with. It just feels so immense. And I know I'm sure that looks different for everybody. But I would love to hear a little bit about what keeps you going doing this work. And I will start with Devin for this one.
I think I have it pretty easy. I get to work in a very beautiful place and spend like 80% of my jobs outside. So nature is a great inspiration. But it's also like if you're once you get like wrapped into like, oh my gosh, the world is like, we need to do something, I feel like it's just kind of like infectious and you're like, what else would I be doing? So I just the motivation of like, there are things to do. And I think just finding that, like, if you know what you can be doing is beneficial, I think it just kind of sticks with you, and just the desire to keep doing beneficial things for our community.
Yeah, I've heard that from other climate leaders, just like, I am not, you know, I just get up and know every day that what I'm doing is really important. Like, what else could I get up and be doing? I'm working on this thing that is so pressing and so important. So yeah, I mean, that is great motivation. I will pass it over to Christine.
This is a great question. So I think for me is kind of like equal parts fear, also a like deep love for the lands and its people as well, and also hope. You know, fear, at least, like pretty much on any given day, I would say I have some underlying climate anxiety in the back of my head. And that definitely gets worse and worse the closer we get to fire season. But there's also like so much love as well. And I remember during the Walbridge fire, and I remember being in my front yard and these like half burnt leaves falling from the sky, and being able to identify the different species, even like, oh, that was from a tan oak tree because it's like half burnt, or like this is from a bay laurel. And I remember feeling like some deep, deep pain and sadness for the lands on that day. And I also remember the day earlier this year when the sun did not come out and the sky was dark all day, and there was all those apocalyptic pictures taken over San Francisco and everything like that. I remember also just feeling a deep sadness for all the people who were stuck inside that day, including myself, people who suffer from asthma, people who it wasn't safe for them to be out. And more than that, I remember feeling a deep pain for the people who were forced to be outside on that day, the people who were working in the vineyards, were harvesting plants for all of us, harvesting food for all of us. And it's like that love that really motivates me. And also the hope as well. I don't know if any of you know AOC's Message from the Future video. I'll drop it in the chat for everyone in a second. But it's this amazing video that tells what a vision of the future can look like. And it's really that vision of the future where everyone has fresh water, where everyone has clean air, where everyone has a good green job if that is what they desire, where there is equity, where everyone is able to flourish. Like that vision of the future is what truly, truly motivates me. Because that is what we can build. And that is in fact what we need to build. And so that's, I think, what keeps me organizing with Sunrise most evenings of the week, what keeps me doing my job day in and day out, is really that hope for the future.
Thanks. Yeah. I will pass it over to Connor.
Thanks. So my main answer to this question, I couldn't say better than Zuzu just said it in talking about hope. So I'll pivot to I mean, when I first started getting involved with climate action, it was definitely from a place of fear. That's something that motivates me. It's not something that some people, you learn the science and you are face to face with the overwhelm. And some people shut down, but I kind of freaked out and was like, I need to do something. And that's not a sustainable place to be emotionally. And there was a moment like 6 years ago, something like that, when I was living in Portland, Oregon. That was part of a direct action where we held up an ice-breaking ship that Shell was going to use to drill for oil in the Srjc Sea off the coast of Alaska. And we prevented it from leaving the harbor for like 4 days, caused a big hubbub, and eventually the Obama administration canceled the permit for that exploratory drilling, which was this like overwhelming feeling of like solidarity with the people who are willing to put their bodies on the line in service of our community and the planet. But there was also this like kind of crushing, sobering moment of like, wow, even if like we stopped every drilling rig from its intended operations, there's still like so much to be done. Like this is I try to steer clear of like, battle tech terminology, because I'm not a huge fan of that frame, but for lack of a better word, like it's a fight that needs to be fought on every front, right? Like we need to be addressing climate change from every possible angle. So I was kind of in like this despair mode for a little while, but hanging on to that feeling of solidarity. I was thinking like, I feel like if we were telling stories about wins and people coming together with shared values, and kind of taking that like moral stand and collaborating creatively, it would be so much easier to motivate people than all the bad news that is dominating what little media coverage climate gets, right? Which was kind of what inspired my whole film project. And that's what sustains me to this day, is knowing that there are so many people in so many different places, like literally everywhere, from all walks of life, who are engaging with this problem, like Zuzu was saying, like out of a place of love. Because even if fear is mixed in there, it's a fear that you're going to lose what you love. And so to me, that's still coming from such a good place. And that's really what keeps my fire burning, right? Like, yes, we have to hold the hurt, but also, we can look to each other for that sort of shoulder to lean on, and lift each other up and keep each other going. Which is absolutely at the heart of the Sunrise movement too. So it all connects.
Yeah, so much just to emphasize between what you and Christine both shared. I think that, fear, I will say, like, fear is a valid motivation, number one. Number two, I think this was mentioned, I think this is a quote from your film, actually, Connor. Like you interviewed someone who said that it is easy to be passive or easy to be cynical, and it takes so much courage. It takes courage to have hope, right? And that is really inspiring to me. It inspires me to be brave and to have that hope, which I do agree is kind of, it's linked to that fear. Like you will have both, I think, working on something like this. Nina, over to you.
The easiest thing for me to say is just ditto to everyone, but I'll go a little bit into it. It's hard to not just repeat what everyone said, but the common theme here is, fear is a big part of it. As a millennial, I read a lot of dystopian YA novels. Like I've seen that like really crappy version of the future, which you could say for some people is unrealistic, but not really, if things are projected to go the way they are right now. But with that, it's not just avoiding that fate, but like kind of like what Christine was saying, especially with that AOC video that she dropped, like this could be like a really big moment to make such huge systemic change, not just purely based off the climate, but I think as you alluded to this a little bit earlier, Allison, like it's such an intersectional issue. Like if we fix, climate related issues, that like definitely goes hand in hand with social justice and racial justice and housing and hunger and all these things. And it's really that vision of a better life. It's not just avoiding this terrible fate, but like building such a better environment for everyone, myself, future generations and current generations. I feel like that gets kind of lost. Like obviously we have wildfires here, but you see things like Texas, things like all the flooding happening in the South right now. It's just like there are people being directly impacted today. And I think that's also another motivator, is like, this isn't something that, we're just trying to avoid later. Like it's happening right now, not just here in California with wildfires, but everywhere. And yeah, I think it's just having that hope and building that community with other people. I think you could get really in your head about this if you don't have people to talk to and kind of express those feelings and just come together and come up with solutions, which is what the Sunrise movement really is just like a giant community. Obviously here at the local level, we have the Sonoma hub, but then you have 400 other hubs. And it's kind of reassuring to know that you have thousands of other people out there also in community working on this issue. So yeah, ditto to everyone. And also, like, I'm sure all of you are active outside or are hikers or work outside in some capacity, but that connection with nature, whether it be like for a few hours on the weekend or if it's in your daily work, I think that also really puts into perspective like what you're fighting for in a sense, but also that connection that you gain being outside, I think is a really big motivator as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I love in Sunrise when we talk about that vision of a better life. I can just feel my body like, oh, yeah, that sounds really good. Like that makes me feel better. And I think for me, it's been really inspiring to work with such a motivated crew of people my age, from all over Sonoma County, just working together on this. It's been really, really cool to see that and to experience that, in this environmental education and conservation field as well. Feel really inspired by my peers in this realm. And yes, it is a very, very intersectional issue. I thank you for highlighting that as well. I think that working on something that hits so many goals that improves so much of life is also a great motivating factor for a lot of folks. So the next question I wanted to talk about, and we've kind of talked about this already, it comes up really naturally, I think, if you're talking about climate change in Sonoma County, but I wanted to ask you all how you've been affected by these weather events, by fires, flooding, or other climate change disasters on a local scale. I know most of you have mentioned you've lived in Sonoma County for a little while, and maybe you've talked about this a little bit already. We can just go around maybe quickly and talk a little bit. Did that affect your work? Did that change your relationship to working on the climate crisis in some way? What for other folks out there in Sonoma County who have likely experienced something like this, like what did this, these kinds of experiences do for your work on the climate? And I will hand it off to Connor to start.
Yeah, so I have only lived in Sonoma County for about a year and a half. I had been living here for maybe 6 weeks when the Kincaid fire happened, for which we were, we lost our power, we were evacuated, we were out of our house for, about a week. I think that's a pretty common experience for most Sonoma County residents with that fire. And more recently with the Walbridge fire in Forestville, technically I was not under mandatory evacuation orders. I was about 25 yards south of the boundary as it hits 116. And my partner and I did head over to Sebastopol to her family's house just for a little bit of peace of mind. And one of my colleagues lives also in Forestville, but more in the forest, and she was under mandatory evacuation. And I just remember during that week or so that the Wallbridge fire was at its height, trying to work, because that is our reality in late stage capitalism. There's a weather disaster, and just not being able to focus. I'm not a Twitter person at all, but when we have these fires, I find Twitter to be like an invaluable resource. There's a couple local journalists who just absolutely kill it. And I just couldn't stop, like, what's it doing now? What's happening now? And like having to stay inside. And even just thinking about it, it's hard to be coherent now and without the sort of like stored tension and trauma coming back. In a long-term sense, it definitely affected the way we are programming at Daily Acts, in that we are trying to facilitate more and more conversations about mostly landscaping practices that are in line with fire experts recommended best practices in terms of which plants are on your landscape, how they're arranged, how you maintain them, how you irrigate them, what types of mulch you're using. Some of which are a departure from the way we've always done things. So that's been an adjustment for sure, but it feels good to be able to empower people to try to minimize the risk.
Yeah, it changed so much of life in Sonoma County, and it's certainly, I know most environmental organizations would say that it changed how they work and some of their goals and programming as well. I will go ahead and pass it over to Nina.
Yeah, so I, again, live in Rohnert Park, which has been pretty untouched through all of this. So I've been fortunate enough not to have lost anything, whether that be a job or a house. But even still, it's pretty traumatic every year, because every year you're like, is this going to be when I lose everything? Like, is this the time that I'm going to be like the people that I read about or see in the news and stuff like that? And there's also just seeing like people around you suffering, worrying about all your friends and family, things like that. And then toxic air, like we don't know how that really will affect us in the future. I feel fine now, but like what's going to happen when, 10 years of fires build up in my system, But I think all of it, kind of like what I said in the previous question, it kind of puts everything into perspective, especially like if you are working outside. Like I like to hike at Annandale, and I went there a few weeks ago, and you just see how that fire really impacted that area. And that's like a park, imagine like all the surrounding neighborhoods and things like that. And so for whatever reason, California and Sonoma County specifically are really getting the brunt of the climate crisis. And I think being here and witnessing that really just sounds like a bad time to use this metaphor, but puts a fire under my butt to, really kind of push people. Because in the end, like I keep saying this is kind of the theme of whenever I talk, but policy really is what gets a lot of things done. It's not like the end all be all for everything, but making sure that we have better systems in place where, we don't have destruction because, a spark flew out of one of our 1,000-year-old power lines or whatever, I think the major effect on my work and activism is just like going harder for that stuff when I experience these things and when I see these things happen in other places. So that's kind of like a brief way of putting it, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely makes sense. I can only imagine that's true for so many folks here in this county, that it really was a catalyst to some of the work that they're doing now to address climate policy and climate change, climate issues, in whatever way that they're doing now. I will go ahead and pass it over to Devin.
Yeah, climate change is here. all the way looking back, I think into 2014 when I was transferring to UC Santa Cruz to Sonoma County, we were going through a pretty severe drought. And I remember just being like, oh my goodness, like this, I don't remember things being this dry ever since growing up. And I think that was a sign of climate change all the way back in 2012. So I did my senior thesis at Santa Cruz on rainwater catchment and gray water systems and how we can implement these across. And then we got some rain, and rain started coming for a few years. I'm like, okay. But now I think we're in another extreme drought. It's so dry out right now. It's very nerve-wracking. Pepperwood, 95% of it burnt in the Tubbs fire. I was currently working here. Our barn and all of our equipment was lost, and just coming back to that landscape. My father also lived in Coffey Park and lost his home. And that was like one of the houses I kind of grew up in. And just the trauma through the community, and not really knowing how the landscape, learning about ecology, fires on this landscape, but not really knowing what that means. So getting to watch that recovery, I think I learned a lot. I think our community learned a lot about how to do disaster response. But I think, that 2018 year, I don't think we had a fire in Sonoma County. It felt like people were kind of starting to forget. 2019, the Kincaid fire came. Pepperwood burned about 60% of our preserve. So we burnt twice in 3 years. Luckily, we didn't lose any infrastructure. CAL FIRE was able to stop it on our property. But yeah, it burned again. Just because it burned one year doesn't mean it's not going to burn next year. I think in 2019, this glass fire burnt over in the same year that the Hennessy fire burnt, just months earlier. So you're like, we're getting double burns within months of each other, which is terrifying. And then the LNU complex kind of happening. I live in Forestville also and was evacuated, and firefighter resources were so drained. I had my wildland firefighter training and got called on to help at the Walbridge fire with the Geyserville fire department. So that was an interesting experience of like, holy shit, like excuse my language, I'm sorry. But just like I am now, because we're so lacking in resources of our preparedness of our fire departments that like seem pretty well staffed, and like we're not like underfunded in Sonoma County, at least I didn't think we were. Now calling on community resources, where just pulling in anybody they possibly can that has any training. And then continuing that year, there was the glass fire, and it would just burnt about a ridge away from Pepperwood. So that was almost 3 fires in 4 years, and burnt up St. Helena Road. And so many people that are really engaged in the environmental community lost their homes, and just like it just seems like, I don't want to be a downer, but like I think understanding the reality of what we live in now, it's like not like being prepared for these fires and like being prepared with our emergency response is like necessary, because we are living in climate change. Like it's not a future thing, it's happening, and it's just getting more extreme. And all these things I think we're all talking about, and we need to like do everything we can from all directions. It's not to stop climate change, it's to mitigate the most extreme events. And I'm pretty nervous moving into the future of what these events will be. And I think it's really important for all of us to know that maybe these last fires, and Nina, you said it, you're like, oh, I wasn't super directly impacted, I didn't lose anything, but like who knows what the next year is. The positive thing I guess I'll end on is I've had more volunteer engagement. I've had more community engagement since these fires. More people care. More people understand our connection to the natural world. We're not like, oh, our little human city over here and then nature over there. It's all one and the same. We're on one planet. There's one biosphere. So, I mean, hopefully these more extreme weather events are making people more aware in understanding our connections. But I think we need to be prepared and in the mental state. And, for better or for worse, Sonoma County is getting really, really good at disaster response. I think Sonoma Ecology Center and the county did a super awesome job of like houses burnt. We need to get wattles around them. We need to protect our watershed. We need to like stop this toxic flow going. Compared to seeing the response on these other fires in previous years to seeing the responses from the fires this year was awesome. Like how quickly we organized, how quickly we got on it, knew what our priorities were. Part of it's sad, but I think part of it's also we're getting good at disaster response in Sonoma County. And I think we're just going to continue to see this throughout the world. It's basically like now Texas, and they're losing their power grid, and their more extreme events. Like I hear people say like, "Oh, are you going to move out of California?" It's like catching on fire, but it's like, where do you move? Like what disasters do you want to deal with? Yeah, I'll end there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there is so much loss, and it's important to acknowledge that, especially when we're talking about, you know, what we've all experienced here. I'm really sorry to hear about your house. And I know, I knew asking you this, that Pepperwood has been impacted like extremely by these fires. And that the scale of these catastrophic events like goes beyond what we can prepare for, because we're not in known territory at this point. I mean, I think, you know, like you said, with the Walbridge fire, like I'm sure we had more resources in this county. I'm sure we had more effort put towards it than perhaps we did prior to the Tubbs fire. But even that, like, because of the timing of that fire with so many other fires around the state, like we just can't keep up, right? Like with being prepared for these types of unknown extreme weather events. I would agree that, there's, you know, been the greater community engagement around these particular things in general. I've noticed greater community interest in fire-related topics, in learning about fire. Both of my parents were wildland firefighters, so it's really cool for me to all of a sudden like prescribe burning is like a catchy term that people are talking about. Like there has been kind of a shift, and certainly I think more so in this county as a response to some of this. So I'll pass it over to Christine.
Yeah, well, thank you all for sharing your stories. It's really traumatizing for our community and traumatizing for us as individuals. And, you know, certainly as a resident of Sonoma County, resident of Santa Rosa, definitely experienced the evacuation, definitely experienced the smoke days, experienced all of that. It's interesting, you know, they say you never forget your first. Well, Tubbs fire is the fire that, you know, was really impactful on me, as the subsequent fires have been as well. But I remember like waking up early. I was, you know, gonna go to work that day, like any day, and opening the front door and like seeing the flame burning down the mountainside in East Santa Rosa. And like in a panic, I was living with my sister at the time, like running into her bedroom and like shaking my sister and be like, there's a fire. And then later in the day, just being like a complete idiot and just like biking around Santa Rosa. It's like totally smoky, but I was like checking things out because I just didn't know yet what to do when a fire was going on. And like people were pulling over, they're like, do you need a ride somewhere? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm just checking things out. I don't know what's going on. And then I remember after that, I was living right next to the Veterans Building at the time, which was the primary evacuation shelter. And I showed up there pretty early in the day. And it was complete chaos, quite honestly. There was elderly folks sleeping on the floor. Our immigrant community was there without access to language services. So many people just crammed into this building. And I remember there like wasn't yet much food, but there was these loaves of bread, like Franco American Bakery had like dropped off bread. So we were just like grabbing loaves of bread and just like handing it out to people. These people who had lost everything, you know, lost their homes, weren't going home, lost their pets. And that, you know, was incredibly impactful on me. But I also remember that I think it was a couple months after that, it was in November, that on social media, it was like kind of blowing up on all of my friends' feeds and just kind of all over the place. It was the first time I saw the Sunrise Movement, and it was a giant sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office in Washington, D.C. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of the Green New Deal. It was the first time the Green New Deal had even been announced in the public at all. It was like the inception of it. And being like, all right. And also all these like young people were being arrested. It's like hundreds of young people in the halls demanding climate action. I was like, all right, like these are my people. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to get involved with. It's like people who are putting themselves out there, putting themselves on the line for, once again, like the land that they love and the people that they love. Like we do need to fight tooth and nail for our futures at this point. And that was the moment where I was like, let's make it happen. Let's bring sunrise to Sonoma County. Let's bring sunrise to Sonoma County, and let me think of ways I can get involved as well.
Yes. Yes. Wow, that is amazing, and yeah, auspicious timing for hearing about Sunrise Movement. That's incredible. So we have about 20 minutes left, and we had one more question that I think will kind of relate to some of the questions that have been coming into the chat. So I'm going to do my best to kind of loop them together. And our last question for these panelists was about what they would like people to know about taking climate action, and especially for young people to know about taking climate action. There was a question in the chat about one of the panelists asked about any advice you might have for a freshman in college who is pursuing a major in environmental management. Do you have specific advice for, if someone in, getting their degree who may be interested in doing this work, in addition to any other advice you may have? And I guess something else, another question out there that I could see being looped in here potentially is, part of the Green New Deal is creating these like jobs for all. And that's something that I think is really notable and great about that. And one of the questions is, are there signs of new jobs being created in our fields? So maybe along with like any advice, you have for young people wanting to take action, any advice for pursuing this in your degree, what would that look like to take action in your career? What have you been seeing out there? So I know that's a lot. We don't have like a ton of time left, but hopefully we can hit on some things before we go into the rest of the Q&A. And I will go ahead and just pass it back to Christine to start.
Yeah, I guess some advice I would offer. I guess first and foremost, don't go about climate action on your own. And what I mean when I say that is, I think for a long time, I was trying to save the planet, what felt like by myself, basically by like saving every plastic bag that ever came into my house and every plastic container, like putting in a closet until like that closet was like overflowing and flowing into the kitchen, and just like trying to do it all, but failing at that by doing it by myself. And so my recommendation is get involved with other people that are doing this work. And I think Nina was talking about this earlier of, there are thousands of young people who are doing this work, and we are more powerful if we're doing this work together. So get involved. It's scary to get involved. I remember the very first time I showed up at a Sunrise event, it was in Berkeley. I like drove down there by myself, and I was like so nervous because it was like all these people I'd never met before. And I was like, they're going to be so awesome and so much smarter than me and like so much better in all these ways. The reality is everyone's just people, and everyone's just trying to fight for a livable future. So find those people, join those people, because we can make more change that way. And also when you find those people, it's fun. Like the reality is we are living in a tough time globally, but we also have to find joy, and we have to like celebrate and have fun, be silly and make friends, because like that's also what it's all about. In terms of careers and seeing some like movement and some shifting, definitely at Sonoma Water, we are looking at Biden's new climate corps that he created, and looking at creating positions. So I don't have those positions like at this moment to offer people, but movement is happening. I think at the county level as well, looking into climate core positions to protect our natural spaces, to protect our water. And so definitely be looking for those jobs in the coming months and coming years. And I think just more and more there is going to be so many climate related jobs because that's what we're going to need to protect the planet.
Yes, thank you. I'll pass it over to Nina next because I'd be curious to hear if you've seen more in the policy realm, if there's more positions. I don't know if you like look at these things or if it comes across your inbox every so often, but yeah, is there more jobs in the policy realm around climate, especially like recently with the new administration? And yeah, any advice you have for the young folks out there?
Yeah, for sure. I would say there's always, for the most part, jobs like in, like state policy realm, like Sacramento stuff, but also this is kind of like a path I would like to take, not projecting onto whoever asked this question, but there's a lot of environmental justice organizations that work with policy. So definitely in the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of policy positions and a lot of fellowships and internships to really like start diving into that realm. So I would definitely look into that for sure. But just to like go quickly through all of the questions posed, something I would like people to know about taking climate action is that you don't have to be like super expert scientists to take action. As long as you know, hey, like climate change is bad, fossil fuel corporations are influencing our politics. That's all you need to know. Like if you've got that down, like get into it. Don't be scared. And like Susie was saying, like there's a big community, like whether it be the Sunrise Movement, whether it be just like you and a group of friends who want to start something brand new. I think that's like a really cool way to do it. So like finding that community really helps. And this is from, I'm quoting, paraphrasing, Srjc Martinez, who's another really awesome young climate like activist. But something he said at a talk at SSU that really stuck with me is your activism doesn't need to look like my activism. And I think that's really important. Like you don't have to do what all of us on this panel are doing necessarily. Like find that niche, find the way that you want to be an activist and do it. And that's kind of another segue into this next question is advice for people going into school who want to study environmental studies or whatever it may be. I would say that a lot of people freak out and they're like, okay, climate is going to hell, like everything's bad. Like, I just want to drop whatever I'm doing and just like work on climate stuff. I would say like, hold on, wait a second. I think for almost any kind of career path or whatever like passion you have, there's an entryway of like climate into that. So I would say like, if anything, kind of like take that passion of yours and find how it intersects with the climate movement and just do what you want to do and just find a creative way to like incorporate climate into it. I don't think you should just drop your passion to like just put your heart and soul into all of this. I would just say find again what you like to do and make sure it like just intersects in the way that it works for you. And I think I answered almost all the questions. I tried really hard, so
thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I know we could have spent, just like the whole time talking about advice, I'm sure, and like things you could do and resources that are out there. And I will certainly include some resources and places to look in the follow-up email. So if you're watching and you are wondering about other, links to some of these places, know that's coming your way. Yeah, I love like just synthesizing this advice, like don't do it on your own, like your activism can be unique and that you can, like we said, climate change really, it's so intersectional, it affects everything. So I'm sure you could incorporate action in some way to almost any area of study, especially, going into college at this time. So just keep it in the back of your mind, that it's something you would like to bring in. I think that's great advice. I'll pass it over to Devin. And I just wanted to mention, since you, work in a conservation position, I think you saw that some folks are asking like about, getting into the conservation field and that path within climate action, do you have any advice for that specifically?
Yeah, totally. I'll just kind of touch on that one first. The Natural Resource Management Program at Srjc, if you are local, is super awesome. A new director just took over. Her name's Brianna, but Casey Wade, who is the longtime director of that program, is still teaching, is still very involved. And it's really exciting. They're growing their program. They do an awesome job of like on-the-job training, exposing people to what careers are out there, and like, hey, if you don't want a degree, but you want to get in this field, we'll just help you move in that direction. Or, hey, you do want a degree, we'll help you move in that direction. So it's really a great place of like, they'll help you get to whatever pathway you want. And I went through a large portion of their classes, and they're very informative and expose you to a lot of different things. And then just kind of playing on that, like for if you're in college and looking to do this, and maybe the Santa Rosa's not, like do volunteer, take as many internships as you can. It's really important to find out what you like don't like doing as much as it is you do like doing. Huge props to like all three of these other panelists who are doing policy work, because I can't handle that. I'm like not a policy person. I like being outside. So, but that's such an important part. But that was something I did, an activist internship for a semester when I was in Santa Cruz, and it was not something that I was great at, not something I found passion in. So I picked a different pathway, but that's so important. So just trying a lot of different things, like staying in the line with the things you like, and then folding in environmental. If you want to get into banking, like if you can figure out a great way to find climate change enrolled in banking, that's awesome. Like we can use this climate lens of like putting it in every single field, and just kind of thinking about that as we kind of move down our path, and just being open to new information. The science is always changing, and it's really important not to get stuck on something, because sometimes something will change and we'll need to shift and pivot directions, especially as quick as climate change is coming. So just being open to always learning, being open to new ideas, and just not being afraid to try things out. I did like 3 different internships that I'm like not super into like hardcore research. I couldn't really do policy. I'm like not a great advocate because I get nervous when I'm like approaching strangers on the street. But I can do my land stewardship and I can be out on the land. So I found my passion that way. So I encourage everybody to just like find what they're passionate about. I kind of lost going with this.
I would say I went to UC Santa Cruz too, and I also just did like so many internships. I think they really pushed that there, and I guess I would echo that, like getting out and getting this hands-on experience to find out what you like, to find out what works for you, to see what logistically even works for you. I think that's something that's really helpful with internships. And I guess I would also echo that, internships and volunteering are great. I know that can be a little challenging to navigate right now, but some things are slowly starting to do like small volunteer events. And with any volunteer event you go to, any internship, like all of those are networking opportunities. I would say look at anything as you're going along as a networking opportunity, or just an opportunity to make connections and to hear about what people are doing that might give you some more insight that you didn't get just from like doing the hands-on work.
Can I build on that really quick, Allison?
Yeah.
So like totally, as you go through your career in volunteering, you don't know who you're going to meet, and you don't know who that person's going to be. And it's really important to network. So always just be super nice to people and like treat them as like they're a potential future employer, because you don't know who anybody is and you don't know what they're going to be. So like networking is really important, to just be kind to people and treat them with respect, and they'll see that. And then, because I mean, think about it from your own selfish needs of like, oh, I'm going to be nice to everybody, so hopefully they'll be nice to me. But that's, I think, something really important as we move through life, and it's just going to like help you in your career, just to be kind to people. because I say the saying and I think it gets misinterpreted sometimes, but it's like, it's really important, like networking, it's who you know, not what you know. Like we all kind of, it's hard to judge somebody's knowledge, but if you've interacted with that person and they've been like thoughtful and kind to you, that's somebody that you'd want to hire.
Yeah, it seems basic, but it bears repeating, definitely. So yeah, thanks for chiming in. And then over to Connor for your advice, your insight on some of these topics.
Yeah, well, I mean, like right down the line, y'all are checking off all the things that I was going to say. So I would really quickly, I would just kind of underscore what Nina and Devin were saying about, so like, yes, we need people to fill jobs that are explicitly designed around addressing the climate crisis, and like with, you know, Biden's climate core and the fact that we're going to need to retrofit like every building in America virtually, like that's a lot of jobs right there, right? But I think it's equally, if not more important for everyone to be bringing, as Devin said, that like climate lens, and specifically a climate justice lens to everything you do. You know, whether you're like working in the trades, if you're someone who's really knowledgeable about, you know, energy retrofits or switch, like electrifying a house, like that'll take you a long way and it's needed. If you work in the service industry, having this framework of like all of our decisions that we're making need to be made from the perspective of, is this steering us towards a livable climate or away from a livable climate? Like if we can have that be pervasive to that point that it becomes the water we swim in, like we're a good ways down the road to meeting our goals. Yeah, and so, yeah, so many good points that y'all already said. So one, just an aspect that is near and dear to my heart is storytelling. There's always a need for innovative, heartfelt, deep listening centered storytelling, especially around climate, right? Like, you know, when we're talking about how each of us is impacted by, you know, climate exacerbated weather events. Like to me, that is such a valuable and affirming experience, like just that exercise in empathy and like kind of recentering around that shared humanity and the kind of vulnerability we have in this precarious moment in time. So, you know, bringing that into whatever you're working in as well. Like, I know it's tough within science fields to kind of wear the scientist hat versus getting accused of wearing the activist hat, but elements of storytelling into all of the work that we do. You know, I think that's kind of like the defining characteristic of our species. We're a storytelling animal. That's what motivates people at the end of the day. In terms of jobs in the field, really quickly, I would just say that like pretty much every day I've got something in my inbox about when someone from our networks or alliances, partner organizations are hiring. Just today I got one that the bilingual botanical bus mobile herb clinic is hiring. Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods are hiring. So like in the specific sense, like there are also, yes, definitely jobs coming up in the field as more and more people are coming around to the needs for this work.
Yes, I would agree. Like there are certainly, you know, still jobs popping up all over in the environmental field through this time. So it's worth checking those job boards. It's worth subscribing to people's newsletters and staying involved and seeing what opportunities are coming up out there. We just have 2 minutes left. People have such great questions in the chat. Thank you for addressing storytelling. There was a question about that and how to develop storytelling abilities. I will go ahead and give some just closing announcements, and then can we all just stay on for like another 2 minutes to talk about just one question that I think applies to all of you. And then if you asked a question for a specific panelist, I will do my best to we'll talk about these questions in a debrief afterwards, and I'll do my best to connect you later on. So hopefully you can chat about this a little more. And there's just a lot to say about climate work and all the amazing things these folks are doing. So can't quite get to all the questions at this time. But my main announcement is We will be talking more about environmental careers, skills that people are looking for when they're hiring candidates in the next panel on March 10th, so a week from today, exact same time. We will be hearing from people who support early career leaders. So if a lot of your questions for these panelists were about what skills carry over or what is transferable, how to make a career change, we will be talking about that in more depth at the next panel next week. So I encourage you to register for that, even if it's just to get the recording. I think that will have a lot of great information in that as well, especially if you're looking specifically at going into conservation or environmental education, that realm. Thank you all again for sharing your perspectives. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for attending today. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions. My email is in all of those Eventbrite follow-up emails, and stay tuned for more resources that I'll be sharing when I get that follow-up email out to all of you tomorrow. It will also have the recording to this as well. So thank you. You can add any last thoughts into the chat. I just wanted to ask really quickly about what skills you would say carried over most from college to your careers or entry-level jobs. And I would also add like any skills you got outside of college, right? Like what things have made you successful? If you could share like one quality that you feel like has put you in the position where you are now. I'm sure there were many, but what's something that comes to mind? And whenever someone's ready to just quickly share one thing, feel free to chime in.
I can go first. So unlike the other panelists, I'm sure, I was in a liberal arts college. I have an English degree. I went to a Jesuit school. So like my whole college career was kind of trying, the cornerstone is like education of the whole person. So for me, the skill that I took away from that experience that is translated to literally everything else I do is it was like cultivated in me the ability to listen to perspectives that are different than my own, find common ground, and find ways to collaborate. And really just knowing how to be like an active listener, no matter what career you're in, is going to take you so far. So yeah, that's my little piece of advice for you.
Yes, I agree. Active listening and collaboration is huge, and certainly something to highlight if that is a skill you feel you have. I'll pass it over to Nina for a quick summary.
My experience at Sonoma State was I was a volunteer coordinator with JUMP, which is Join Us Making Progress. And also just going to school in a new location, like you're actively always trying to meet people and make friends and do things. So I think just being involved and like being open to meeting people is definitely something you still need to bring into like your career path, or if you're looking for a job, it's just like making those connections wherever you can, doing things that are different, just like for the sake of getting to know people, showing up to events, free pizza, like it all kind of intersects with life outside of college. And I threw this in the chat quickly, but for someone who was in the same program as I did, there's a whole class where you get presentations from people in the environmental industry. Just take note of those presentations that really stuck out to you, add those people on LinkedIn, check their job boards. That's how I got my position, was I just signed up for their newsletter and saw an opening. So that's some like basic level advice, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, LinkedIn, super helpful. And yeah, I mean, I would also add like following these organizations on social media, like more and more people will post things on there. So that can be really helpful if there's somewhere you want to work, like hit them up, follow them on Instagram. Like that's becoming a better and better resource for stuff like that. I'll pass it over to Christine.
Yeah, I just have a small, but I think important tip that I wish I had listened to more when I was in college. is building relationships with your professors, as intimidating as they are, and I was certainly very intimidated. You will likely need to call on them later on to write you like letters of recommendations or be a reference for you or something like that. And so it's much harder to go back later on and be like, hey, I took a class with you this one time, will you write a letter of recommendation? It's like so much better if they're like, oh, this is the person who like came to office hours and, you know, talks, or, you know, it builds a relationship. So I wish I had done more of that, and I recommend everyone does that.
Yes, great advice. Also great advice for when you do an internship or like a longer term volunteer position, like cultivate that relationship and get it out there. You know, before you leave at the end of your internship, like ask if you can use them as a reference. It's a little thing, but it's huge. You definitely will need that later on. And then Devin, over to you, and then we'll close this out.
Yeah, I think just kind of, I think almost everybody kind of touched on these, but the soft skills that we, especially in an undergraduate degree, like kind of doesn't really matter what your degree's in, like as long as you can take away those skill sets of like how to interact with people, pushing through the nervousness of going and approaching somebody. I even saw someone in the chats like, don't be afraid to go ask somebody if they have a position opening, even if you haven't seen anything. I actually did that. And then like a semester later, somebody approached me and was like, hey, there's an opening in this internship that last time you talked to me, there wasn't any positions. And they just remember you, like if you just give them, I know COVID right now, it's hard to give face-to-face, but it really helps. And then just being stoked on the work you're doing, if you actually like it, like expressing that outwardly. And some of us aren't as comfortable doing that, but just, and then being kind and expressing gratitude are huge, and that'll get you really far in this world, whatever career you're doing. So just treating people with respect and kindness, I think, is something we should all focus more on.
Yeah, no one will tell you, I think, in college to like focus on those soft skills, but it is super important. So I hope those are some good tips for you all out there, something to keep in mind as you're navigating college, as you're navigating internships, finding your way and finding ways to make this world a better place. I hope that this all helps you out with doing that. And again, feel free to reach out, and thank you all for being here and participating today. I think that is all. Thank you all. There's no round of applause, but I'll give you a round of applause. You all are so inspiring. Thanks for being here. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.